The Disney differentiators. There are many of them. Their immersive theme park lands, their intellectual property, their resort hotels, their cast members, and their top-tier customer service. These are the things that get Disney guests coming back and back and back for multiple vacations. But in the early 2000s, this wasn't quite the case. Disney was seeing less and less guests stay on site, and they needed to do something, and they needed to do something fast. So they created the Magical Express, a free transportation service to and from the Orlando airport to make it easier for guests to visit Disney.
Have a magical trip, Mickey.
Gee, thanks. Well, come on, everybody. Let's go.
But after just about 20 years, this service was removed permanently. It left guests surprised and honestly devastated. And so I asked myself, what did kill the Magical Express? That's the topic for today's video. Welcome back to our channel. If you are new here, I am Mouselet2, and it is officially my 9-month mark on YouTube. That is crazy that I've been here for 9 months talking about my favorite Disney things and my favorite Disney and civil engineering crossovers. So far, we have covered Disney's monorail system. We've covered why Disney doesn't have mosquitoes because of civil engineering. And we've even covered Disney's STOL port, their small abandoned airport they have on property today. So when I was thinking about the topic for today's video and a follow-up to my video 2 weeks ago about Disney roads, I was wondering, why did Disney take away the Magical Express? And so I started doing some Googling, and I didn't really find the answer. And so I knew that if I looked hard enough, if I dug deep enough into the annual shareholder reports and the old master plans and old public documents, that I would be able to find the answer. And oh, did I find the answer. I didn't expect that this would be quite as layered as it was, and so we have a lot to cover. Let's dive into it. Chapter 1, the early days. Hey, it wouldn't be a Mouselet2 deep dive if I didn't talk about the early days of Walt Disney World when they were trying to build a vacation kingdom and so much more. Now, for context, Disney World today is located about 20 miles away from Orlando International Airport, and that is where many of the guests fly into to go to Disney. But that wasn't always the case, and that also wasn't always the plan. Now, if you watched my Disney deep dive on roads 2 weeks ago, some of this won't be new information for you, but it's very, very important. And if you're new here, go watch that deep dive too. As Walt was searching for the location of his new park, a little pocket of land stuck out to him for a few reasons. The natural resources like Bay Lake, the large size to expand, and the close proximity to roads. This was a huge win for Walt because the Disney company had big predictions for the number of people who could potentially visit Florida. In the 1969 master plan, they say that of the 20 million visitors to Florida during 1968, some 15 million or 3 out of 4 tourists came within a 2-hour drive of the Walt Disney World site without the inducement of a major attraction in the Orlando area. With the exposure to a potential audience this large and the emphasis placed upon recreation and outdoor entertainment in Florida vacationing, these are extremely favorable indicators of the potential for a successful complex of commercial recreation attractions at Walt Disney World. Now, in addition, during that time, 80% of the people visiting Florida were driving in their own automobiles. So driving on the roads, this was going to be critical to access to and from Disney. And so while Disney was focusing on building their Magic Kingdom theme park and their resort hotels and the Seven Seas Lagoon and the golf courses and so many other vacation kingdom things, they also needed to think about the access. How would people get to their parks? Well, luckily, Walt was thinking about that. On his early sketch of Walt Disney World, at the very bottom, he drew out a jet port. And that early sketch turned into a more real concept plan where we can pretty much see everything stayed in the same spot. And FYI, the jet port on this map is right around where Celebration is today. Now, here's what the Orlando Sentinel said about this from an article on February 3rd of 1967. These things appear for certain for Osceola County. The main entrance to Disney World, a jet port of tomorrow, the city of Reedy Creek, and a large agricultural area. Despite the jet port development, which may be in phase 1 or possibly phase 2 of Disney World construction, according to General William E. Potter, vice president in charge of Disney administration in Florida, development of other airports in the area is encouraged. And the jet port was simply described by Potter as big enough to handle all private and commercial planes and will be so created that people and baggage come out at the same time. Now, why build this on Disney property? Why use their valuable land for this? Well, the reason is it was needed. They needed tourists to have easy access to the park. They needed their future 20,000 Epcot residents to have access. They needed corporations to have access for their industrial park. They needed access for deliveries and more. And the plan at this time was to create a connection between Magic Kingdom and Epcot, the city, and the entrance plaza and the industrial park and the jetport. And they would do that with a monorail running like a spine through the property, creating all car-free connections. Brilliant, 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 brilliant. This is so brilliant. And don't even get me started, but kind of do get me started on the issue that our airports face today with access to and from the airport. It is a problem all over the United States. It's a problem at LAX. It's a problem at Boston, which is the airport closest to me. It's a problem with JFK. It's a problem everywhere. It is hard in many ways for people to get to an airport. You might have to drive your car and park in an expensive long-term parking lot, or you might have to take some sort of shuttle bus in that ends up taking a long time. While airports in the United States are trying to build out infrastructure like autonomous people movers, there are many that are still finding it very difficult to make these important connections for guests. And so Walt had solved that problem with this jetport. But obviously this jetport at Disney did not end up happening. So why? Well, there are a couple of reasons. Well, first off, Walt passed away, and Walt passed before they even broke ground on the Walt Disney World project. But luckily, his brother Roy was there to take over this project and to make it successful. But unfortunately, in December of 1971, Roy passed away himself, and the Disney company suddenly had lost both of their leaders. And so the company took a step back, and they just didn't take quite as many risks. But another reason that the airport didn't happen was because of what was occurring at the McCoy Air Base at the time. And this was the airport that they really had in the Orlando area. The McCoy Air Base was initially known as the Pine Castle Army Field, and it was used for flight training for World War II. In the early 1960s, before Disney came, when jet airline flights were finally coming to Orlando, it became a joint civil-military facility called the Orlando Jetport at McCoy. And this was good for the amount of tourists coming in at the time, but with Disney coming, this would not be sufficient. It really would not. And so this brings us to Chapter 2, Disney is coming. It's the mid-1960s. Disney has announced that they are coming, and the state of Florida could not be more excited because this is the biggest opportunity they've ever had. But at the same time, they could not be more nervous because they have a lot of things they need to do to make this possible. They need to build out a lot of infrastructure, roads, airports, and more. And an Orlando Sentinel article from November 26th of 1967 sums it up very, very well. Orlando may just wind up with one of the world's most advanced, most beautiful, and most action-packed jetports, give or take a few rather large ifs. The largest is whether the airport buys the city's official and bold proposal for handling things to come, aviation-wise, here in Central Florida. It sees McCoy Jetport readily expandable at a cost of upwards of $50 million. Phase 1 would involve building a new 12,000-foot east aircraft taxiway that would substantially up the number of daily commercial flights from its presently restrictive 51, and it could be completed some 15 months after the Air Force says go. Phases 2 and 3 call for a highly modern airport terminals and a third instrument landing runway to be used entirely by civilian aircraft. Eventually, 240 flights daily would be possible. This could and would be really, really great. But the problem was it would not be ready in time for Disney World to open. So this might be an issue. But actually, no, it wasn't an issue. Because at this time, both the United States Department of Transportation and the Florida Department of Transportation, I'm going to call them the DOT from here on out because it's less of a mouthful, they were trying to be on the forefront of a new technology. No, not flying saucers, but something that felt to many equally as futuristic, and that was short takeoff and landing planes. These were planes that could use short runways and were designed to climb and descend at steep angles with minimal noise. They were considered to be the future of transportation to provide short connections between adjacent cities. I have a full deep dive on the STOL port that I will link here where I get into all of the weeds. But for now, we just need to cover some basic information that's going to set the scene for the future of this video, what killed the Magical Express. So some bullets coming at you now. The United States interstate highway system was developed in the 1950s and the 1960s. And while this was great, the United States feared that with the rise of passenger travel on automobiles, that the roadways would become majorly congested. And they weren't wrong on that. So in the 1960s, a new transportation idea is created. It's called short takeoff and landing. The US DOT estimated that by the mid-1980s, 1 of every 2 air passengers would use these planes. In 1968, New York claims that a series of STOL ports will be developed there within 5 years, again, providing these short connections. In the late 1960s, Florida too jumps on board. They want to become a national pace setter in the development of a statewide STOL system. And in 1971, Florida announces that the very first STOL port would be built in Florida at Walt Disney World. And so there's your bullets, and there's the answer to the question, how will people get to and from Disney? Because while there's a lot of information that I'm kind of throwing at you here, that is the crux of the video. How will people get to Disney World? STOL ports, great. The STOL ports were going to link airports all over Florida to Disney, so people could fly into Tampa and the Orlando McCoy Jetport, hop on a much smaller plane, and land right next to Disney World. The 2 airlines that were going to provide this service for Disney were Shawnee and Executive. And despite a huge advertising campaign and honestly an idea that was really futuristic, not saying it was perfect, but it was pretty futuristic, the STOL service failed. RIP, it did not work. There are not a lot of STOL ports in the United States, and this is just isn't a solution. The predictions that 1 in every 2 air travelers would fly these were absolutely wrong, and eventually Disney abandoned their STOL port and their airstrip. But really, they weren't that upset. Surprisingly, they told officials at the time that the loss of STOL service would have no significant effect on park attendance. And even the Florida DOT seemed to let go of their big STOL dreams, as did the rest of the United States. But still, we have the question, if not STOL ports, how will people get to the Disney World property? Chapter 3, the taxi cab age. There were basically 4 options. People drove their own cars, people rented a car, people took a bus, or people took a taxi cab. And let me just say, as I was researching for this video, never did I ever expect to go down quite the rabbit hole that I did with one of these services. In fact, as I was learning about this, it almost completely changed my opinion of this entire situation. So allow me to tell you. Miniature Chapter 3.1, Rental Cars. Rental cars were a critical part of Disney's plan to get guests to and from property. And so they actually partnered with several different rental car agencies over the years. And just fun fact, they did the same with the airlines. The first rental car agency they partnered with was Hertz. Hertz was named the official rental car company of Disney. And from an ad in 1971, they said, when Walt Disney World was looking to put a rent-a-car company on its grounds near Orlando, Florida, it picked Hertz, which is no small honor. When you consider that Walt Disney World is already being called the vacation kingdom of the world, it'll have hotels, golf courses, lakes, swimming pools, camping areas, and a Magic Kingdom theme park. And their official ad says that the board of directors of Walt Disney World unanimously voted for Hertz as their official rent-a-car company. Now, after that, in 1975, the National Car Rental System signed a 10-year partnership with Disney to be the official car rental company. In the 1970s, more and more car rental companies began flocking to the area, obviously seeing the opportunity. One of those was Alamo. Many years later, in 2002, Alamo launched a partnership with Disney World and Disneyland as the official rental car of the happiest place on earth. And just some rental car information that's kind of important here is that Enterprise acquired Alamo in 2007, so now Enterprise is the official rental car of Disney World. And they actually sponsor several attractions, including Tron. Miniature Chapter 3.2, Buses. Now, if people weren't driving their own cars in or renting a car or flying in, they could take a bus. And in 1971, the Greyhound Bus Company partnered with Disney as the official motor coach of Walt Disney World Magic Kingdom Club. They were initially offering service to Disney World from most Florida cities, and they operated on both weekdays and weekends. In 1973, they also began adding bus tours, as they called it. These were 3-day tours, including 3 full days at Disney World with 3-day admission to Magic Kingdom and 18 admissions to theme park attractions. They even made Mickey a custom size 14 Greyhound driver's cap. Now, Greyhound was the choice for many guests and many students visiting Disney World for many years. And while there are still Greyhound buses that run to Orlando, the partnership between Disney and Greyhound isn't quite the same. And in fact, that type of bus service for many has dropped off a lot in the United States. But now we get into Miniature Chapter 3.3, taxis. Okay, this is a big one. This is the biggest one, taxis. This is the rabbit hole that I went down as I was wondering how people get to and from Disney that opened my eyes to a whole new world. There's a lot of tea in the taxi cab business during the 1970s until basically today. So Disney and the state of Florida and the city of Orlando knew that taxis would be very important to the overall business model to get people to the Disney property. A lot of guests would want to use this option to get from the airport to Disney World. And so in the 1970s and the 1980s, Mears Transportation, who will become very important to our story very soon, quickly became one of the most powerful companies in Orlando. Originally, they were a small taxi business that opened in 1939, but eventually they expanded aggressively. They bought out or forced out almost all of the competitors, or they made it very hard for them to succeed, and they secured key contracts with the city of Orlando and the Greater Orlando Aviation Authority, which operated the Orlando International Airport. By the mid-1980s, Mears controlled nearly every form of ground transportation at the airport. They had taxis, they had limousines, we'll talk about their shuttles soon. And not only that, but the company's founder, Paul Mears Sr., had built close relationships with airport officials. That relationship allowed Mears to win exclusive or near exclusive rights to pick up travelers arriving in Orlando and effectively locking out competitors. And so Mears' dominance in this market meant that almost any tourist arriving to Disney that didn't rent a car or take a Greyhound bus would pass through the Mears system. Obviously, over time, this led to a bit of controversy. If you want to build an Orlando Monopoly board, Mears is Park Place and Mears is also the boardwalk. They were that dominant. Competing transportation companies accused Mears and the Aviation Authority of creating a monopoly. They claimed that the deals were unfair and they limited competition. There were lawsuits and there were investigations that followed, but honestly, Mears maintained its hold on the market share and continued to operate most of the airport's shuttle and taxi services well into the 1990s and beyond. And not only am I talking about the airport, but Mears also had a private deal with Disney that only Mears checker cabs were allowed to line up at the hotel taxi stands, and they did pay for this exclusivity. But after all of this with the taxi cabs and things, Mears did something even more interesting. To continue his dominance of the local industry, he made some new rules. He purchased the Orlando International Airport's struggling shuttle service, the A1 bus lines, and now Mears controlled not only the entire taxi cab business here, but also the bus shuttle service. The company Mears was the first that was allowed to own both shuttles and taxis, because before that, a company was only allowed to have one entity or the other. Mears also worked with local travel agents to actually make a commission on selling the shuttle service. So during this time, a lot of people were using the shuttle service because it was part of their vacation package. And the shuttle in general was incredibly effective for moving the large number of people arriving at the airport who wanted to get to Disney. There was no need to have all sorts of private taxi cabs and private vehicles when they all needed to go to the same spot and could hop on a bus. Now, is this entire kind of shuttle experience sounding familiar to you? Because it might be, or at least it's about to. Chapter 4, A Changing Disney Company. The year is 2001. Disney is on top. And in fact, their 2000 annual shareholder report said that between 1999 and 2000, revenues increased 11% from $664 million to $6.8 billion, driven by growth of $383 million at the Walt Disney World Resort, reflecting increased guest spending, record attendance, and record occupied room nights. Then 9/11 happens. On the many, many impacts that this had on the United States, one of them was a drop in tourism. People were afraid to travel, and this had a huge impact on Disney. It led to the cancellation of half of Pop Century, the closure of River Country, and a huge drop in hotel occupancy from cancellations and reduced travel beginning after September 11th. In the 2001 Disney Annual Shareholder Report, they say that to date, Walt Disney World attendance is down roughly 25% versus the first quarter of last year. We expect hotel occupancy to be down by approximately 20 and 15 percentage points for Walt Disney World and Disneyland compared to the first quarter of last year. The trend continues 2002, even lower, 2003, even lower, and 2004, things finally level out a little bit, and the hotel occupancy is around 77%, which might seem good, but no, it really was not. We'll get to that in a minute. But another important metric being tracked was per room guest spending. And this was also dropping and not increasing. Per room guest spending is the food and the beverages and the merchandise and things that people spend at hotels. And it is a key metric that people focus on. They need guests to spend more money, and so if it's decreasing, they're losing money, and it's just not a good situation in general. And so really what we're seeing here is that the Disney company is struggling to bounce back. During the 9/11 time, they had actually closed the French Quarter completely. They had to reduce the capacity at Riverside because they just didn't need that many rooms. They completely abandoned the second half of Pop Century. It was totally abandoned in place, and I have a full deep dive on that. It's really, really interesting. And while in the years that followed 9/11, Disney tried to increase the occupancy of their on-site hotels by offering things like discounts, it just remained low. And so something needed to be done. What could Disney do to get guests to stay on site? They had to think of a solution. Chapter 5, The Magical Express. In 2005, Disney partnered with Mears and created the Magical Express. This would be free transportation paid for in full by Disney using all of the Mears shuttles with new wraps and theming on them to get guests to and from the airport. The thought was that maybe if Disney offered free transportation, no need for car seats, no need to even handle your own bags, that this would be a big enough draw to get people to stay on site at Disney again.
Flying into Orlando Airport? Then you get to experience Disney's Magical Express service. We can pick you up with our airport bus, drop your bags and you at your doorstep. Plus, with the drive off your mind, leave your worries behind. Transportation, it's on us.
And more guests staying on site, not renting cars, not having access to things outside of Disney property, meant guests were staying in the Disney bubble. The Disney bubble has been a concept that Disney has had since the Vacation Kingdom. The Vacation Kingdom was Disney's attempt to get guests to stay on site for longer, not just visit their one theme park at the time, Magic Kingdom, but do all of their on-site activities, spend money, pay for archery lessons, pay for a boat, pay for a nighttime cruise, pay for shopping. They wanted guests to stay on site because they're making more money and they're getting to keep that guest kind of in their pipeline, okay? And with the Magical Express, they didn't know if this would work. It seemed like something that might be a draw to guests, free transportation, no hassle, but they didn't really know that it would be, and so they really started it kind of as a pilot service. And so this little pilot that they tried was actually incredibly effective. They moved 5,000 people a day within the first year of launching Magical Express. 5,000 guests. There are about 40 people per bus, so that's about 150 buses that they were running every single day to and from the airport. And so the partnership with Mears was exactly what they needed. This didn't just stay as a pilot. Disney turned this into a permanent program. I do want to interject that the actual structure between the payment between Mears and Disney has never really been outlined, but Disney did have to pay fees to the airport to pay for the actual shuttle parking spaces. They had to pay the Mears operators, they had to pay the Mears buses, and also pay Mears. So Disney was paying a fair amount out of pocket to fund this service, but it was the solution that they needed. And so here's what they said in the 2005 annual shareholder report. During our third quarter, the company launched 2 programs, Disney's Magical Express and Extra Magic Hours. Both are designed to increase occupancy at the Walt Disney World hotels. And so did it work? Yes, people were taking the Magical Express, but did hotel occupancy rise? Oh, yes, it did. Hotel occupancy jumped up to 86%. This is a 9% increase from 2 years before. The per room guest spending increased close to $15. And over the years, occupancy continued to rise. In 2008, it jumped all the way up to 90%. And after that, the recession hits and things changed a little bit, but the other thing we see is that the per room guest spending continues to rise. And so basically, the Magical Express had succeeded beyond all expectations. Now let's fast forward to 2019. Yes, there had been a slight dip with the recession, but by 2019, the annual hotel occupancy was over 90%. And just for reference, if you may be unfamiliar with how hotel bookings work, basically. So I did some research. Once room occupancy reaches like 90%-ish, it becomes really difficult to fill additional rooms. You're never getting a hotel occupancy of exactly 100%, or it's very, very rare. That's just because checkout dates don't line in with check-in dates, and so increasing the occupancy becomes nearly impossible. And Disney's corporate leadership reiterated this point during several earning calls in 2019. From their perspective, the hotels were full in 2019. And so there is important key number 1. Hotels are full. Why was the Magical Express created? To fill hotels. Okay, now the hotels are full. The other metric is how much money are people spending when they stay on property because they're staying in that Disney bubble. Well, that's not working that well either, because while people aren't renting cars and they always had access to taxis, now it becomes easier than ever to get to and from any destination with the rise of third-party apps like Uber and Lyft. Suddenly, if people wanted to go to the outlets or go to Universal City Walk or go wherever in Orlando, they could with a click of a button on their phone. So the Magical Express wasn't working to hold people in that Disney bubble anymore. Basically, it had served its purpose. And so Disney is faced with a dilemma. It's costing them a ton of money. Do they want to keep the Magical Express? Do they not want to keep the Magical Express? What do they do? Well, while they're thinking about all that, they're also having some conversations to the side with train service. More on that in a minute. Chapter 6, Goodbye Magical Express. On January 1st of 2022, Disney permanently discontinued the Magical Express. They had already ended the luggage handling service during COVID, and this was just the nail in the coffin. Goodbye. Here's their official statement. Vacationers have more options to choose from than ever for transportation, including rideshare services that save time and offer more flexibility to go where they want when they want. In light of this shift, when Disney Resort hotel bookings open for 2022, we will no longer offer Disney's Magical Express service for airport transportation. We will continue to operate this service for new and existing reservations made for arrivals throughout 2021. Additionally, complimentary transportation options, such as buses, monorails, and the Disney Skyliner, will continue to be available within Disney World and for Disney Resort hotel guests, including to and from the Disney theme parks. Now, Disney wasn't stupid. They knew that they would lose some bookings, but they also knew that they could fill these bookings with the guests who were trying to book, but the hotels were at capacity. So really, there was a net change of nothing. Other than the fact, obviously, that Disney was going to save some money, which from the Disney's eyes, especially during this time when they suddenly were kind of putting a surcharge on many, many things, making fast passes cost money and charging for resort guests to park overnight, which was a terrible decision that luckily they took away. This was more money in Disney's pocket. Now, guests were furious. They were very, very angry, but they were also slightly hopeful, dare I say. But before that, I just want to briefly mention that Mears, who had been a, dominant force before, and then Disney bought a contract with them, great for Mears. Mears still stayed in service. They opened up their own Mears shuttle service, the Mears Connect. They also had a competitor come onto the market, the Sunshine Flyer, which then Mears acquired or joined partnership. So now Mears is again like a monopoly for this service. But in this case, it's because there's just not as much demand. So I give Mears a pass on being a monopoly in this day and age, kind of. So people weren't stranded, okay? They could take the Ubers and they could take the Lyfts and they could take the Mears service, and they could also potentially take something that was going to be built in the next few years, the Brightline train. Chapter 7, Brightline. During this time, Brightline signed a letter of intent with Disney to build a station at Disney Springs. At this time, Brightline had already secured $1.7 billion in tax-free bonds and a 170-mile Central Florida corridor with 35 miles of train right-of-way. And in November of 2020, Disney announced plans to add a Brightline station to Disney Springs. But there's a little hiccup here. The routes had never been finalized. For a while, there were talks on what path the train would take to get from the airport to Disney. One path would share State Road 417, and this was the route that Disney had discussed with Brightline, and one would take State Road 528 to International Drive, which is another heavy tourist area. The 417 route, while Disney's preferred route, that one drew heavy criticism from several kind of key stakeholders, and then the other route became more and more popular with the city of Orlando and Orange County and Universal Studios wanting it, because that route would have a station right by Epic Universe and the Orange County Convention Center. And so that being said, while there was all of this debate of where a route would be, there was always plans to have a route at Disney Springs or right adjacent to Disney Springs. It just might go to other destinations too, okay? In the end, the 417 route was not chosen, and so Disney made a statement to the Orlando Business Journal that Disney was going to step away from the project because the updated plans for the train's route did not include a stop on Disney property. As many people who are involved in this project are aware, the new route configuration does not support a Disney Springs station, and as a result, we don't anticipate being part of this project, said Avery Mayer. Now, Ben Porrid, Brightline's Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs, said an alternative station will be placed near the original Disney Springs site, albeit not on Disneyland owned by Disney. And they hadn't confirmed exactly where or how it would connect to Disney, but we can see on this map that it really is super close to the Disney Springs property. Now, just to make it clear, there was never a plan for Brightline to replace the Magical Express because that timeline would not have worked. Simply, it was good timing, and it also met the goals of the years past, more like it, of the Disney company who at the time were fueled by ideas of alternative modes of transportation like the monorail and the people mover. this is a good time to mention I have a People Mover deep dive coming soon. And so that really is the story of the Magical Express. Today you do have many options. The Brightline train and where that Disney Spring Station may or may not be is still in flux. How that connection will be provided is kind of up in the air, but that will hopefully be an option, and that's really the option that's needed. There also is the Mir shuttle service that you can take to and from the airport that still offers that bus service, but at a charge for guests now. There are Uber and Lyft, there's renting cars, there are still taxis, many of them owned by Mirs. So guests now have more options than ever to get from the airport to Disney. But none of these options truly are convenient or, more importantly, free or heavily subsidized like the Magical Express was. And this isn't just a Disney problem. This is a problem across the entire United States of America and the entire world. This will continue to be a question and a problem to solve in the future as we move forward with Orlando International Airport getting bigger and having more people arrive, and Disney getting bigger and Universal getting bigger. How are people going to get to and from this location? Passenger cars are not the solution. I'm sorry, I know we love Ubers and we love Lyfts and we love the convenience, but single passenger cars are not going to be the solution to move the thousands, millions of people who need to get to and from these destinations. Some sort of mass transit will have to be used, and I do think that in my lifetime, something new, whether it's more frequent service from Brightline, new stations, new expanded bus service, something new will come to help build upon just the car fleet that's out there right now. So that really is the story of the Magical Express, a little bit more detailed than I think any of us realized, but kind of explains why Disney decided to end the service, although I know a lot of us are still disappointed by that. So I hope you enjoyed this deep dive, and if you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel, because every single Monday for Mouselets Monday, we do deep dives on some of the most interesting Disney topics. And next week, I will be camping at Fort Wilderness Campground, so the Vacation Kingdom will be coming back. We'll be talking all things campground, campsite in the coming months, and I am so excited for that. But for now, I will see you later. Time for me to pack.